I started to look for where are they going? What is the goal? What is the possibility of what they're offering, and then how are they showing us how to get there? And I started to look. Fortunately, having started young, at 16 with TM, and then doing some Zen in college, and having kind of some spontaneous like shifts of awareness and consciousness through both unintentional positive experiences and some through kind of meeting with loss when my father passed away of cancer, and I had a tremendous amount of grief and I was holding it in, didn't know how to deal with it, and then one night walked out of my college library feeling very kind of burdened, and looked up and thought, how am I going to deal with this? And then somehow by looking up and just opening my awareness up, I felt like something was lifting, and I just followed the awareness out and then kind of stayed there and felt this infinite sense of connection, and then felt that I was kind of aware of the infinite and then kind of aware from the infinite, and then felt very embodied and felt this tremendous burden lifted. And then had the sense that there's, that this that had relieved this and that helped me then kind of go through much more kind of humanly and ordinarily the grief, but also felt like I had accessed a human dimension of consciousness that seemed to not be, coming from outside, but seemed to be just kind of available. And I started to play with that through meditation and through other ways of shifting consciousness to see if this, which had been talked about in all these books about your true nature, your ground of being, this essential well-being, is possibly available, maybe closer than I had imagined, and accessed maybe more easily than I had been told. And so that kind of led me to go to graduate school and then off to Sri Lanka and India and Nepal and meet with a lot of these teachers, and then found some very profound ways of shifting consciousness that seemed to be very direct, and then but weren't just transcendent. So I discovered that those who seemed most happy were ones who had kind of a waking up from this kind of small contracted sense of self, but then they had a waking in back to their bodies, and then they had a kind of waking out to compassionate action. So I kind of was drawn toward those people, and tried to learn how to do that. And then when I started to find intentional ways of shifting, I became very curious and tried to make them very simple, and then check them out with other teachers, and then kind of describe ways to do them, and then check them out with students to see if they worked well, and then check them out with traditions and books to make sure I was on the right track, and have kind of, tried to make awakening possible. An awakening meaning what I now believe is just the next natural stage of human development, the potential to access a dimension of consciousness that allows us to be fully human in a way that wasn't possible. So this first dimension of consciousness, I call it awake awareness. And awareness is the foundation of living a human life. We cannot know anything without it. Yet although this kind of awareness is so essential, we know very little about it. Most of us take it for granted, and we focus on the content, the things we're aware of, rather than awareness itself. Discovering this awake awareness is the key to the transformation of consciousness called awakening, that leads to our ability to live from freedom, well-being, and loving connection. But why don't we know it? Well, 4 reasons that are given from Tibetan Buddhism are that this awake awareness is so close you can't see it. It's so subtle your mind can't understand it. It's so simple, this awareness, that you can't believe that that's actually what's the most important thing. And then when you discover this awareness, it's so good you can't accept it, that it really is for you. So awakening, this is from a chapter called Being Home While Returning Home, the process of awakening. Awakening is possible for you. It may not sound like a big esoteric thing, especially when you're having a bad day. We are all imperfect. This is not going to change. But neither is the fact that we can realize who we are, and that is unconditional love itself. Today, there's a potential for a new stage of human development that combines awakening and growing up. It's clear you can only grow up to a certain level unless you then awaken. And it's also important to mature psychologically while awakening. No matter how advanced we get spiritually, the goal is not to transcend being human. In order to awaken, you don't have to leave your life, go to a cave, become an Olympic athlete of meditation, or to take on any set of religious beliefs. Regardless of your belief system or your spiritual affiliation or non-affiliation, you can begin awakening in the midst of your daily life. You don't even have to wait until you've gotten your life together. In fact, if you're looking from your ego center, you'll never feel good enough or prepared enough. Most adults are ready. Chances are, if you're reading this book, you're ready. If you've had practice concentrating, completing tasks in school and work, and forming relationships, you've grown up enough to begin to wake up and learn to live from open-hearted awareness. My basic feeling is that awakening is possible, it's available, and it's because this dimension of awake awareness, or what becomes open-hearted awareness, is equally available to each of us, as each of us, right now. That it's not something that needs to be developed or created, that it's a dimension of consciousness that's been covered over by the faster moving thoughts and stronger moving emotions, and the way that we create an identity through this looping pattern of thought that creates a kind of mini-me in our heads. And then from there, we start to look in this dualistic way and look to thought and from thought and create this kind of agitated, anxious, chattering sense of self. And by learning how to unhook awareness and have it drop and open to the spacious awareness, and then from the spacious awareness feel embodied and aligned and open-hearted, these dimensions of consciousness are just waiting for us to be invited back into our lives. And so that's the possibility, and that's the hope. And my book is kind of a manual about how to do that. And it goes through the traps and the detours that you can get caught in along the way, and then goes through a series of practices that has this unique kind of inquiry method where, rather than just asking yourself, who am I, with thoughts and words, or trying to work with your thoughts or energies, that you actually have your awareness unhook from thinking and drop into this spacious awareness, which then is embodied and open-hearted. So by doing that shift, people can learn fairly easily, as easily as you learn to do anything that takes, little effort and is new and unique. And then once you have done this, it just opens up this kind of storehouses of gratitude and love and interconnection that don't have to be created. You don't have to try to accept everything. When you shift into this dimension, you will accept everything from here this dimension of you is already accepting of everything as it is. So this is the kind of unique approach. So I think maybe I'll open it up for questions, comments. Yes, I mean, I think, the thing is what most of the traditions will do is some people will awaken and they can describe all the other preliminary practices, and then when they get to awakening, they can't describe it. So they're like, then the thing that isn't the thing, that's what we're looking for, and then they'll describe the qualities of joy, interconnection, love, peace of mind, oneness. But absolutely, yoga is all the traditions seem to be going toward this fully human potential. Now, some of them, as they get toward the end, will take a left turn or a right turn into kind of transcendent, a little bit too transcendent, or a little bit too isolated, or feel that you need to flatline the emotions and snuff out everything so that you end up, hello, what kind of tea would you like? All teas are the same. There's no preference. Or kind of go off into a pure witness state where you're kind of detached from the human, or they'll go off into a samadhi where you're just in blissed in, or just off in a cave. But ultimately, I think the yoga is union of ultimate and relative reality, the divine and the human. So that union is really kind of what awakening is about. Things to ways of arriving, and then almost training to remain. So kind of playing with the natural tendency to return to the inertia of the everyday mind, or the inertia of the ego center, which is going to pop you back, particularly in the midst of a daily life, but just in general, even if you're sitting quietly somewhere, the habit is to go back to orient by thought, and to create a thinker, and to kind of do this protective evaluation of how am I doing. But what is found is that sense of self is actually trying to protect itself, as if there's a little entity inside. And once you realize, oh, that entity is not who I am. I'm this human that may need protection, but sitting here, there's no threat. So any little, watch out, what are you doing? Don't you think you should do this? Just becomes like a little, birds chattering in the sky. And you get to kind of start to look from open-hearted awareness toward thoughts, feelings, and emotions, and actually feel like you're the ocean of awareness from which they're rising. So there's really not even a second thing happening that you need to fight with or leave, but the depth of it, from really like in the cells of your body. You feel like you start to know your experiences, not from a transcendent witness, like a mindful witness, but from an intelligence that feels your emotions from like a loving presence of your emotions, but then also in your emotions, like your emotions are feeling themselves. So they're not worried, they're not going to kill you. You can feel that, oh, they're just shaking. They're not killing anyone. There's no threat. There's no overwhelm. Because you're not a small self that can be overwhelmed by your emotions. You're a whole being. So training to play in the field of consciousness is kind of a little of what you start to learn how to do. And everyone's a little different in the way they do it, but there's a few principles, just as many principles, I think, after you recognize and are in open-hearted to stay and to remain and to abide and to express, as there are to find it. And that's kind of been a missing piece, is the practices after. Yeah. The question is about the effort or the attempt to find relief or enlightenment or awakening, but then the efforter and the efforting and the trying become the obstacle to finding, because what seems to happen is that it's the one who's trying to awaken, the one who starts to want to awaken isn't the one that awakens, it's what you awaken from. So the constellation of consciousness, the kind of ego identity, which is made out of ego function, which is thought, feeling, and sensation, which is just a functional part of your mind, and then this ego identity comes in and tries to say, well, I'm not only thinking, I'm the thinker. I'm not only the thinker, I'm the commentator. And I'm the commentator about, what do you think we should do? Well, don't say that. What do you mean, don't say that? I'll say that. I don't think I'm getting what I want. Well, let's try this enlightenment thing. Okay, well, that's a good idea. So that one that feels like it's you isn't you. That's the efforter, that's the ego center, that's the false self, or the constellation of consciousness made out of thought. When that relaxes and isn't trying to solve a problem, trying to effort, then you can see what's here. Your awareness can see what's here. So, since you asked, that's one of the main holdings of that constellation of consciousness, is this efforting, doing, trying that creates a doer, that creates a problem solver. So this little mini-me is trying to solve the problem of identity as if it's a little entity in your head that is trying to satisfy itself like a body. Your body is trying to satisfy or gratify, and there's nothing for it to eat, and there's no threat. It can't be killed because it's a thought. It's made of thought. But so it's perpetually scared and hypervigilant and trying to solve the problem, and any solution it gets one moment of peace, and it feels a little relief, and then it goes, oh, that could be a problem. That could be dangerous. Watch out, you better get back on, try to solve the problem. So, how about if we try this simple inquiry and just look with awareness after you ask yourself this simple question about identity. So this is about problems on the level of identity. What's here now? What does awareness feel when there's no problem to solve? Just now. So understand it with your mind, what's here when there's no problem to solve, and then look with awareness. Drop, open, don't look to the problem solver. What's here now? What's aware? What's awareness like? Just now, when there's no problem to solve. Yeah? What do you?
That solves my problem.
What is it? That's it? What do you notice?
Sense of ease.
Sense of ease. Natural sense of ease. Not trying to be ease, but you let go of the seeker and the problem solver, and here you are. Without the secondary self, and if that commentator comes, now it's no longer the subject, it's now an object. I should try harder, I should try harder. It just becomes a thought about I should try harder. To the easeful being that you are. You feel that? Yeah? Anybody else notice? What would you say? What's the quality that shows up? What's kind of absent and what's kind of present?
Well, at first there was probably fear because it's a new
Okay.
state,
Yes. Okay.
not usually experienced. And then there was some confusion.
Yes.
And then, interestingly, it became curiosity.
Yes.
Oh, it's
That's
there.
Yes.
It's kind of new senses, new sensations.
Yes. That's right. So the
It
curiosity.
starts clinging to.
What's that?
You notice it and it starts to feel good, and a part of you clings to it.
That's right. So it's.
Exactly, return to that feeling.
That's right. So it's starting to identify that part no longer as you, but as what I call operating system one, which is just a ego function that's trying to be an identity. So it'll try, and then you just have to stay open and aware of it, and it'll go, well, don't you think we should try to keep this? And you just say, oh, thank you for sharing. That's an interesting idea, but I'll consider it, but not right now. I'm enjoying myself too much. Yeah, so you get that sense, and as you said, it's again discriminating. You're kind of shifting. You're going down levels of consciousness from being the problem solver to disorientation, right, is what you feel. And then system one gets a little afraid. Hey, wait a minute, aren't we supposed to be in control here? You know, danger, danger. And then like, well, just keep going, just try it. And then all of a sudden, curiosity, which is the quality of the heart-mind. So the heart, open-hearted awareness is not judgmental, is not dividing into right and wrong. It's open-hearted and curious. Huh, isn't this interesting? Just ease. You feel the different way of knowing from here? It's pretty remarkable, right? The amazing thing is it's how close it is. Yeah? Anyone else notice anything? Stillness. Yeah, anyone else notice that? Stillness, quiet, silence, less chattering. That's not about, and here we are in London, so the stillness isn't about absence of sound. It's a quality, while there's background sound, deep stillness, right? Doesn't need to have the external silence or quiet. There's a quote by Anonymous, who's a very famous woman, who says, silence is not the absence of sound, it's the absence of self. So absence of the small self. Then there's silence. There's stillness. There's peace of mind, right? Notice that? Yeah? So it's a dimension of the human consciousness that's available, like a bandwidth of consciousness, like breathing and digestion and and hearing and seeing, that's just available, already installed, but we're just not paying attention to it. We're not noticing it. So and we don't know how to know it. That's really actually the most important thing. Because we're trying to know it with the doer and the conceptual knower and the will and the efforter, and those can't actually know it. They can't even taste it. So they miss it. And then a moment of silence comes by, and then we try to grab it. So this is shifting into it and letting it know itself as both formless and as form, embodied and interconnected, silence, stillness, aliveness, awareness. So the base is this kind of awareness that's non-thought based. Curiosity, heart, knowing, presence, ground of being. Yeah?
So that's regardless of whether or not there are humans to experience that.
Regardless of whether
there are humans or not to experience.
you mean this dimension of consciousness,
Right.
either human or non-human? Yeah, I mean it's definitely, could be like a type of consciousness, but humans are capable of experiencing it. That's really kind of the amazing thing. It's actually invisible and intelligent. It's the absence of objects, but so none of the senses are experiencing it. This kind of a quiet, stillness, peace. There's an after effect in your body, but I'm talking about prior to energy. There's a kind of openness, space, that you're aware of space and aware from space, that then is aware of arising as your body. But it's almost this curious freedom, like the sky, that doesn't have anything, but it can know itself. And as soon as it shifts into that spacious awareness, then the spacious awareness, when it's the ground, can include everything else in a completely different way. And the feeling is, there's no problem in the things that are arising, whether they're pleasant or unpleasant. Anyone else have a sense of that? That what's here when there's no problem? That ability to tune in to that? It's what most of these books are about. They're all trying to get there in some of this way through, or they're getting to the first levels of it and not quite getting to the other, or they'll mention it a little bit, but they'll say, but first let's do this, and then they'll do other things, but they're motivated by this awareness that becomes a presence, that becomes love, that becomes interconnection, intelligence, creativity. Yes?
So, accessing this state of elevated awareness, let's call it,
Yes?
is there a method, or would you say that the whole idea and concept of methodology in this particular case is a hindrance to
Yeah. So I would say there, just as we just did a method to access it. So some of the methods are kind of more unlearning than learning, or untying of a knot than creating a state, because it's kind of a stateless state that's already here, because it's natural. So, but what we're doing is, like with that inquiry we just did, what's here now when there's no problem to solve? We're just saying, okay, let go of that constellation of consciousness that's about problem solving, and then see the natural condition. So there was a method, and the method leads to 1, 2, 3, let go. And the letting go is letting go of the one who's doing the method. So even with you feel the stillness and the silence and the space in the middle of the siren. It's going right through the space of awareness. And then some part probably contracts around the siren, and then there's some other dimension that stays open, yeah? Notice that? So one part gets a little scared, and another part remains open and non-reactive, yeah? So yeah, so the interesting thing in this particular approach is that is to really be clear about what is able to move through consciousness without creating a doer. So your questions are very good, asking questions about, is there a method or not a method? Is there a doer or not a doer? Or the effort or actually becoming the strongest obstacle? So the interesting thing is that the primary way is either untying the knot of the identity, or actually moving awareness around, like from head to heart. So, or from it being identified with thinking to have it come to another sense, like hearing, and then have it open to the space all around. So even without knowing how to do that, just feel like awareness is identified with thought and creating a sense of a little thinker, and then just allow awareness to step back from thought, have it come to hearing at your ears and at the vibration in a small area. Just hearing, without a hearer or focused on what you're hearing. And then have awareness now move from being focused on vibration sensation, open to the space in the room in which sound is coming and going, and then be curiously interested in the space. And then you might even be more curious, am I aware of the spacious awareness? Or what's it like if I'm aware from spacious awareness? If spacious awareness is aware both outside and within, kind of a spacious and pervasive feeling of a continuous field of awareness that's aware by itself without your help, as if you've discovered a field of awareness that's aware and arising like the ocean of awareness as your body and as sounds. And then feel like you just don't have to go back up to your mind to create a center or manager, and just feel like you're have dropped from head to heart, and you're open and embodied. And what do you notice when you have shifted into this spacious, embodied field? What's the qualities that kind of show up?
It's kind of like, usually you go about your day,
Yeah,
like the center of your personality, of
Yeah.
the self.
yeah,
The center is the ego, I think.
yes, that's right.
But this method kind of pushes the ego out, and the center becomes something else.
Yes, that's right.
So it seems like that's a much better way of going on about your day.
Yes,
From that kind of center, where the ego is outside of
That's
this
right.
center.
that's right.
And do you believe that there's some value still in cultivating the ego,
Yes, for function. So again, it's like,
the tool, right?
yeah, so ego function is memory, skills, work, relationships, learning how to communicate. These are all ego functions, functions of your human capacity as a person. So ego function, and then ego identity all of a sudden gets, clenches onto the function and thinks that that's who you are. So what we're doing is we're not killing the ego, getting rid of the ego. We're actually semi-retiring ego identity with equal pay, more vacation days, and less hours. So the ego function doesn't have to be your identity anymore. It's just if you need to remember a phone number, or you need to plan on how much time is it going to get to be here, do I want to do this, what do I want to eat for dinner? That's not you, that's like moving your hand or using your ear. That's a function of you. That's a part of you. You have shifted out of the small thought-based looping pattern into this feeling of being.
And what he describes
Yeah.
it as living regular daily life, which is 2 inches off the ground. Just flying about.
Yeah. So that's kind of cute. Yeah, I would say, I don't know about the off the ground, because in some ways you feel even more embodied and more grounded. It's almost like the 2 inches that were creating a little sense of self are just offloaded. So you feel more embodied and more spacious and more interconnected. You're just a relief of the burden of self-referencing. Do you feel that now? Yeah. Yes.
Like you mentioned about something.
Kind of talk about the head to the heart. The heart is, Ramana Maharshi says that the main practice is abiding in the hridam, which is the heart, the spiritual heart, the heart of hearts. The heart as big as the world. So in some ways, and Tibetan Buddhism calls it bodhicitta, which is the compassionate heart.
Something like the anahata, the unstruck sound.
Yes,
Like
unstruck
the
sound.
that's without sound.
That's right.
Okay.
And so in some ways, just a simple version of it is almost like the emotional heart is like here, usually felt in the throat or in the, like when
The
you feel
vagus
very
nerve. The
vagus
vagus
nerve,
nerve, yeah.
and the emotions when you feel it, like when you feel sad or you feel it here. Then the physical heart is here. Then the heart chakra is here. Then like the cave of the heart, which some practices use, are here. And the heart mind, or the emotional heart, is like touching all those, but it's almost like a door that opens up behind you to the support of awareness behind your back. So it's almost like this eye of the heart. So Augustine called it oculus cordis, the eye of the heart. So there's some sense that you're not in your emotional heart and you're not in your physical heart, but heart is the intelligence that sees interconnection first, and then it makes a discrimination. So it's a quality of mind that feels like it's equally throughout your whole body. It's probably, many people feel as if it's like equally in every cell, And then it's just not located in your head. It's located equally everywhere and also kind of interpersonally and spaciously, as if there's a source bigger than you, that is you, that's bigger than you, that is you, that you're getting information from. And you feel like you're resting in this heart mind and you're using Wi-Fi to the files in your brain to get personal information. So you don't have to go up and think about thinking. So you're in kind of what psychologists call the flow state. Yeah, being in the zone. You're able to optimally function, and yet you're not self-referencing. You're in the now. You feel very interconnected, and everything is happening. So you don't have to be out of society. You can actually be awake and living in society. Does that make sense?
How do you then differentiate, like, I mean, experientially?
The open-hearted awareness or the heart mind then is actually the capacity to deal with the emotional heart.
So the
So-
emotional heart kind of works with like desire, with like attachment.
I mean, there's-
attachment of like sentimental.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a
something.
kind of instinctual part of the heart, but then there's just the emotions that feel sadness, anger, fear, that are just normal part of being human, that can get, too big for the small human ego. So this is the thing, is that in some ways no human ego can live a fully emotional human life. You can't do it, no matter how smart you are, no matter how fast you are, no matter how much you've worked on yourself psychologically. It just can't bear even the basic human emotions when they're fully felt. So we're kind of upgrading our identity to this open-hearted awareness, which is this presence, this feeling of spacious, energetic, alive being, to which it has a compassionate it has compassion toward the emotions and toward the parts of yourself, the subpersonalities, the repressed contents, the karmic patterns, but also the like inner children, the exiles, and the protector parts of you that are angry and the ones that are hurt. So from this capacity of what's called big self with a big S, or from open-hearted awareness, you now can actually love and talk to and communicate with these parts of yourself that seemed too hidden or too strong or too in their own identity to be able to be dealt with from your ego and even your best psychologically trained ego. Can't really can only deal with them to a certain degree. So you have to upgrade this to this open-hearted awareness. Does that make sense? Even unconscious is kind of a term that just is something bigger than that, but that's non-conscious maybe is better than unconscious.
That way, isn't it?
It's hard to know, yeah, it's hard to know. So he said that 95, he heard a podcast that 95% of our humanity is unconscious or non-conscious, and 5% is conscious. So trying to kind of organize yourself and make your life better by like moving pieces on a chessboard of 5% of your life, or living in a little cloud and cleaning up the cloud all the time. Meanwhile, if you step out of the cloud, you drop down below, you open up behind, you find this sky of space and awake space that connects you to something bigger, and also that dimension within you that's the space within you and that's connected to everyone else. And that's what really starts to, so that you don't need to make your unconscious conscious, which is one of the theories of some of the psychological work. Well, okay, if 95% is unconscious, we better make it conscious. Then we'll have conscious control, or something. But it's
the movie where like
even that Lucy movie was tapping into something bigger than conscious mind, meaning conscious, rational, frontal lobe. There's this whole thing about making your frontal lobe in control to help your reptilian brain, and that if you can get more mindfully, and then that's really good for stress at the first level. But we're saying is that there's a tremendous loving presence of being that you can get to know, and that I believe people can, it's not that complex. It's a little more intuitive, the way to learn it. It's a little more like felt sense, like riding a bicycle. But once you get to know it and you have some help to know where the traps are, that you can really learn how to live what has been called, happy, joyous, and free, awakened life. It's just upgrading to another operating system that's already available to us. That is possible. Yeah. Question is about what to do when you get caught or get hijacked by either a big thing or a small thing. So the first thing is just hijacked by even a small thing. So that sense of kind of first being able to shift out and access this dimension of being, and then the natural tendency is either quickly or slowly, like the other habit of mind or subpersonality will come and sit in the seat of the self, and will start to be the commentator. And all of a sudden you've contracted back into identification. It's like a mask is on, and you just missed, like, oh, no, I'm still me. No, I'm me. I'm definitely me. I'm just really kind of upset because I'm remembering this thing that I didn't do, that I better get to, and then I got to get that, and then this. Oh my God, that reminds me of this, which reminds me of that. Oh yeah, that's right. Well, I'll be, and I'm meditating now, but that's all right. But this is more important than meditation. And then you're caught, right? And just that kind of state of mind, but literally, it's not a state of mind. It becomes you. It's a subpersonality that's taking you over. So the key is to make this, to step out, to unhook, to shift out, to return, to let go, to drop, to notice that you're caught. And that's almost like an awakening itself, right? Just it can happen unintentionally or intentionally. All of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, right. You're like, wait a minute. Oh, I'm caught I've been triggered. I'm in a subpersonality. I'm identified. I'm attached. I'm whatever word you want to use for that. And you should almost have your own word that feels like a little, very clear, but a little bit funny, almost like. So you're just like, oh, I'm back in that with that mask on. I'm back in being caught. I'm trapped. I'm in prison. Okay, and then you realize, okay, there's another way to be. There's a way to shift out of that, and then you remember what that way is, and then you do it. So literally, the image is like a cloud or that you're caught or trapped in a looping pattern, and then you recognize it, step back. Sometimes I call that kind of the mindful move, which is just you're just like, oh, I'm aware that I'm caught. By being aware you're caught, you have to be a little bit on top of it, or back from it, or above it, to have a little room, right? And then this particular method in this book and in the CDs is to unhook awareness from that cloud and either have it drop down or open up, so that your first thing is you're unhooked from the mind. You're dropped into your body, or you're opened up into more spacious dimension. And then just that moment of relief is just aware of the space in the room and just non-ego centered. And then fairly quickly to have that awareness recognize, oh, the other dimension of awareness that's not contracted is vast, boundless, spacious, but awake. So then feeling this awake space that you're aware of and then you're aware from. And so that's, curious and unusual, and will show up if you do like 20 years of meditation. It will show up on its own, because that's kind of what they're trying to do, is get to this, but it's actually here. So discovering that, and then interestingly, feeling embodied and open-hearted, and then come back to the issue that you were struggling with. Like, don't stay out. So now that you're in the open heartedness, like, okay, what was I worried about? What was that? And I bring it to me. Come down here. Let it come down to your open-hearted awareness, and then it'll be like, oh, this is a whole different view of that. Okay, and let it be loved and included, and that will start to train, that you're not escaping it. You're not just leaving it. You're coming home, and then you're saying, okay, anybody upset? We got time for you now. What do you need? And then it starts. Yeah, is that help? Yes. Come back. So you can step out in order to access something that's transcendent, as long as you then, from the transcendent, include.